I never thought I'd be the kind of person who crossed that line. Not with him. Not with my best friend. It feels strange even saying it, I cheated. The words taste dry in my mouth, like dust settling on something I can't clean off. But it's the truth. And if I'm going to tell this story, I have to start with that. We'd known each other for almost a decade. He'd seen me at my worst, messy, tired, broken, and never once looked away. He was there before my wedding, before the house, before everything started to feel heavy. He was the person I called when life didn't make sense. And somehow, just hearing his voice made things softer. There was never anything between us. Not once. People used to joke about it, ask if there was something more. And we'd both laugh, no, we're just friends. And I believed that. I truly did. But friendship is a dangerous kind of love. It's quiet, patient, built on 1,000 small moments that start to mean too much. It creeps up without warning, the way he remembered how I take my coffee. How he could tell when I was about to cry before I even knew it myself. How he'd say, "You don't have to explain, I already understand." My husband was never cruel. He just stopped noticing. And when you live with silence long enough, even the smallest bit of warmth feels like light. I didn't wake up one day and decide to betray anyone. There was no plan, no thrill. It was just a slow drift, from comfort to closeness. From laughter to something we couldn't name. Looking back, I think the first betrayal wasn't the kiss. It was every moment before it. Every secret I told him that should have belonged to my husband. Every time I looked at him for comfort instead of home. So yes, I cheated. But not with a stranger. With someone who already knew me too well. And maybe that's what makes it harder to forgive. We met in college, two people who never should have clicked, but somehow did. He was loud, impulsive, always late. I was quiet, careful, the kind of girl who planned everything 3 steps ahead. But friendship doesn't ask for logic. It just happens, and before you know it, someone becomes the constant you measure your life against. Back then, we were inseparable. We shared everything, deadlines, hangovers, heartbreaks, secrets. He was there when I met Daniel. He teased me about him, called him the serious one. And on my wedding day, he stood beside me, smiling like a proud older brother. When he hugged me after the ceremony, he whispered, "He's lucky." I didn't realize until much later that maybe he meant it. Even after I got married, he stayed a part of my life. Birthday dinners, random phone calls, long conversations about nothing at all. Daniel never minded. He trusted me. He used to say, "You two have your own language." He was right. There were things my best friend understood without me having to say a word. He'd notice the smallest things. When my voice was off, when my smile didn't reach my eyes. He'd send a message that just said, "You okay?" And somehow, that one question felt more intimate than any kiss could. I never thought of him that way. Not really. Until the day I caught myself dressing up to see him. Until I realized that the thought of him walking through my door made my heart beat in a way it hadn't in years. And that was the first time I was afraid of my own friendship. Something shifted between us, and I wish I could say when. There wasn't a single moment, no sudden spark or touch that changed everything. It was slower than that, like sand slipping through fingers, one grain at a time. Until you look down and realize your hands are empty. We still talked like before, long messages, random calls, sharing things that didn't matter. But there was something new hiding underneath the words. A hesitation before we said goodbye. A silence that lingered longer than it should. He started noticing things again, the way he always had. But this time it felt different. He'd tell me I looked tired, ask if I was eating properly. And sometimes, in the middle of a sentence, he'd pause, smile softly, and just look at me. Like he wanted to say something but didn't dare. I told myself I was imagining it. That friendship can't turn into something else unless you let it. So I tried to keep things light, jokes, sarcasm, distance. But every time I laughed, my chest ached a little more. I'd catch myself thinking about him during small moments. At the grocery store, stuck in traffic, folding laundry. All the places my mind used to go quiet. Now filled with the sound of his voice. One evening, he texted, "You've been different lately." I typed, "So have you." Then I deleted it. That's when I knew it was real. Not because anything had happened, but because something already had. It wasn't love, not yet. It was recognition. Two people realizing they'd stopped being just friends. Long before they admitted it to themselves. I tried to fix it by pretending nothing had changed. That's what people do, right? They push down the truth, put on a polite smile. And call it control. So I pulled back. I stopped replying right away, made excuses not to meet. Kept my words short, safe, emotionless. It felt like walking barefoot on glass. Every step deliberate, every silence too sharp. He noticed, of course. He always did. One evening, he texted, "Did I do something wrong?" And for a long time, I just stared at the screen. My fingers hovering over the keyboard. Wanting to say yes, you cared too much. But instead, I typed, "No, just busy." The lie looked so small on the screen. But it felt heavy in my chest. When we did see each other again, it was awkward. Like trying to wear a shirt that doesn't fit anymore. We laughed, but the laughter was careful. Our eyes met, then darted away too quickly. Even standing next to him felt dangerous. Because I could feel every word we didn't say. He'd glance at me sometimes, searching. As if trying to find the old version of us. But she was gone. We'd lost her somewhere between late-night messages and too long pauses. Once, while saying goodbye, he almost hugged me. Then stopped halfway and smiled instead. That moment broke something in me. It was the first time I realized how fragile we'd become. How much we were pretending not to feel what was already true. I went home that night and stood in the kitchen. Hands trembling as I poured a glass of water I didn't want. Daniel was asleep on the couch, TV still playing softly. I looked at him and tried to remember. When touching him last felt natural. And for the first time, I couldn't. It was late autumn, one of those evenings when the air outside smells like cold metal and smoke. Daniel was out of town for work, and I remember thinking how quiet the house felt without him. Not lonely, just quiet, like the walls had forgotten what conversation sounded like. I was sitting on the couch with a blanket, half watching a show I didn't care about. When my phone buzzed. Him, "You still awake?" Me, "Yeah." Why? Him, "Just, needed to talk. Can I stop by?" I stared at the message for a long time. Every sensible part of me screamed no. But my thumb still typed sure. When he arrived, he didn't knock right away. I saw his shadow through the frosted glass, hesitant, like he was giving me one last chance to change my mind. I opened the door before he could. He stood there holding a bottle of wine, smiling that unsure smile that always made me feel safe. "I brought peace offerings," he said. I laughed, too quickly, too nervously, and let him in. We talked for hours. About nothing and everything. About how work was draining him. About how marriage was quieter than he expected. About how sometimes life just flattens. He said, "You ever feel like you're living the right life, but in the wrong version of it?" And I wanted to say every day. But instead, I nodded. At some point, we were sitting closer than before. The kind of close that feels accidental, but isn't. His arm brushed mine once. Then again. Neither of us moved. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Even the clock seemed to hesitate. He looked at me, really looked, and there was no pretending left in that gaze. It was the same look from years of friendship. Only now it carried something heavier, something neither of us had the right to feel. I told myself to get up, to end it before it began. But instead, I said softly, "I've missed you." And I don't know if I meant him, or the version of myself that only existed when I was with him. He reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, trembling slightly. That single touch, innocent, familiar, devastating, made my chest ache in ways I can't describe. We didn't kiss that night. But it was the first time I realized that if he leaned in, I wouldn't stop him. When he finally left, I stood by the door long after he was gone. The smell of his cologne lingered in the air. Soft, quiet, wrong. And as I turned off the lights, I knew the next time wouldn't end the same way. A few weeks passed before I saw him again. We both tried to pretend that night had meant nothing, that it was just two old friends talking too late, too long. But silence has a way of stretching the truth. It turns memories into echoes you can't stop hearing. We didn't text much after that. Just small things, a meme, a question about work, a photo of something random. Each message harmless on its own. But together, they were a thread I couldn't stop holding. Then one Friday evening, he called. His voice was softer than usual, a little uncertain. "Hey," he said. "I'm nearby. Thought I'd drop off that book you wanted." I hadn't asked for any book. But I didn't remind him. I just said, "Okay. Come by." When he arrived, the air outside smelled like rain again. As if the universe enjoyed repeating its own mistakes. He stood at the door, holding a book that clearly wasn't for me. "I didn't want to stay long," he said. "Then why did you come?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, and the space between us disappeared. There was no need for more words. We both knew this wasn't about a book. Inside, the house was dim, just the yellow light from the lamp by the couch. He placed the book on the table. But neither of us stepped back. I could hear his breathing, slow, deliberate, heavy with everything we hadn't said. "I shouldn't be here," he whispered. "I know," I said. "But you are." And then he kissed me. It wasn't desperate or wild. It was gentle, the kind of kiss that feels like coming home to a place you no longer belong. It tasted like regret, like rain on warm skin. Like something that had been waiting too long to happen. For a moment, the world stopped. No husband. No friendship. No promises. Just two people suspended in a silence that felt holy and wrong at the same time. When we finally pulled away, he didn't look at me right away. He just said, "We can't do this." I nodded, though every part of me screamed to disagree. He left soon after. No goodbye. No explanation. Just the faint smell of rain and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. That night, I sat on the couch where he'd been minutes before. And touched my lips like they belonged to someone else. It wasn't love. It wasn't even lust. It was recognition. And the cruel comfort of finally being seen. The days after felt unreal, like I was living someone else's life but inside my own body. Everything looked the same kitchen, the same routines, the same husband sitting across from me at breakfast. But nothing felt the same. Every time Daniel spoke, I heard silence. Every time he smiled, I saw someone else's face. It wasn't fair, not to him, not to me, not to anyone. But fairness stopped mattering the moment his lips touched mine. I thought the guilt would crush me. It didn't. Instead, it hollowed me out. I wasn't consumed by shame, I was haunted by memory. Every small thing reminded me of him. The way Daniel stirred his coffee, that same slow circle. The smell of rain on the windows, the same night he kissed me. Even my reflection in the bathroom mirror looked different. Like it knew something it wasn't supposed to. I tried to stay busy. Work, errands, laundry, anything to fill the silence. But silence doesn't care what you're doing, it always finds its way back in. And every time my phone buzzed, my pulse jumped. Even when it wasn't him. Especially when it wasn't him. He didn't text. I didn't either. We were both waiting for the other to break first. And that waiting, that tension, it was worse than the kiss. At night, lying beside Daniel, I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying that moment in 1,000 ways. What if I'd stepped back? What if I'd said no? What if I'd never opened that door? But the truth is, I didn't regret the kiss. I regretted everything that made it necessary. Sometimes, I'd catch myself standing by the window, watching headlights pass down the street, hoping one of them would slow down, hoping it would be him, even though I prayed it wouldn't. I wasn't in love with him. I was addicted to the version of myself that existed only when he was near. And now that version haunted me like a ghost, sitting quietly in the spaces between who I was and who I'd promised to be. A week passed. Then another. I told myself I'd moved on, that what happened was a mistake. A single moment carved out of weakness and confusion. But the truth was, that moment had changed the texture of my days. Even silence felt different now. Then one afternoon, my phone lit up with his name. My heart reacted before my mind did. It wasn't excitement. It was recognition. A quiet voice whispering, "There you are." Him, "Can we talk?" Just 3 words. No emojis, no small talk, no apology. But my hands trembled as I typed back, "When?" We met at a small park near my office, neutral ground. It was the middle of the day, bright and ordinary. People walked dogs, children laughed, life continued. But between us, everything was suspended. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. "I shouldn't have kissed you," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "They were your words," I reminded him softly. "You said we couldn't do this." He nodded. "And yet, here we are." We sat on a bench, a safe distance apart. Our shoulders almost touching, not quite. The air between us buzzed with all the words we didn't dare say. "I've been trying to forget," I admitted. "So have I," he said. "It's not working." There was no drama, no pleading. Just 2 people being painfully honest in the most ordinary place. He turned to look at me then. And for a split second, I wanted him to say something impossible. To tell me that love can exist without consequences. But he didn't. He just whispered, "I miss you." And it landed between us like a confession neither of us could take back. I wanted to reach for his hand, to feel that same warmth again. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "We can't keep doing this." He nodded, and smiled in that sad, knowing way he always did. "I know. That's why I wanted to see you one last time." One last time. The word sat in my chest like a stone. When he stood to leave, he hesitated, as if he was waiting for me to ask him to stay. And for a second, I almost did. But I didn't. He walked away. And I watched until his figure disappeared beyond the trees. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop wondering why the right thing always feels so much like losing. When I got home that evening, the house smelled like dinner. Daniel had cooked, something with garlic and herbs, his quiet way of showing he cared. He greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And for a second, I wondered if he could sense the ghost I'd brought back with me. I kissed him on the cheek, just like always. Routine. Reflex. But the moment my lips touched his skin, I felt the sharp sting of dishonesty. He asked how my day was. And I told him it was fine. The same lie I'd been telling every day since that night. We sat down to eat. He talked about work, the new project he was leading, how the numbers were finally looking good. I nodded at the right moments, smiled where I should. But my mind wasn't in that room. It was still in the park. Still hearing his voice saying one last time. Still watching him walk away without looking back. I wanted to hate him for making me feel this way. but the truth was, it wasn't his fault. He'd simply noticed me when no one else did. And once you've been seen that deeply, you can't go back to being invisible. After dinner, Daniel turned on the TV. Some show we'd watched for years, the same rhythm, the same laughter track. I sat beside him, pretending to follow along. His hand brushed mine once, out of habit. For a moment, I thought he'd take it. He didn't. And I didn't either. Instead, I looked at his profile, the familiar slope of his nose, the faint scar on his chin. The man who used to make my heart race. Now, he just made it ache. When he went to shower, I stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes that didn't need washing, trying to scrub away the image of another man's eyes from my mind. But the harder I tried, the clearer it became. I thought of the way my friend said I miss you. Not desperate, not selfish, just honest. And that's what hurt the most. Because Daniel hadn't said those words in years. And even if he did, I don't think I'd believe him anymore. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling in the dark. Daniel reached for his phone, his nightly ritual. Scrolling through lives that weren't ours. I turned on my side, facing the wall, feeling the weight of two versions of myself battling in silence. The wife. And the woman who sat on that park bench. Finally remembered by someone she shouldn't have missed. They both lived inside me now. And neither one knew how to let the other go. It took me 3 days to write the message. 3 days of typing, deleting, rewriting, and staring at the empty screen like it was a wound I couldn't close. Every version felt wrong. Too cold. Too emotional. Too final. How do you end something that was never supposed to begin? In the end, I wrote just 4 words. We can't do this. I didn't add a goodbye. Didn't thank him for the years of friendship or for the moments that almost made me feel alive again. Because I knew that if I added one more word, even one, I wouldn't be able to stop. When I hit send, the world didn't fall apart. It just went quiet. No reply came. Not that day. Not the next. And for a while, that silence felt like punishment. But then, slowly, it began to sound like relief. I told myself it was over. I deleted our messages, cleared his number from my favorites. Pretended that detachment was the same as healing. But even as I did, I could still feel him. In the pauses between thoughts. In the way my body reacted to his name if I heard it by accident. The first night after I sent the message, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold, watching the lights flicker in the apartment across the street. Every shadow looked like him. Every sound felt like a memory returning for one last visit. I thought about the first time we met. How safe I felt with him. How friendship had been such a simple, beautiful thing before we ruined it. And I realized, we hadn't destroyed it with a kiss. We'd destroyed it with silence. With all the things we didn't say when we still could. A week passed before he finally replied. It was one sentence. I know. Take care of yourself. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. It was the kindest thing he could have said. And somehow, it hurt the most. That night, I went to bed beside Daniel and listened to the sound of his breathing. It was steady, familiar, safe. And yet, in that safety, I felt completely alone. Because even though I had chosen the right thing didn't feel right at all. It just felt like loss. Quiet, invisible, permanent. Daniel isn't the kind of man who asks direct questions. He notices things quietly. The tone of my voice, the way I stir my coffee slower than before. The way I stare through him instead of at him. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through emails I wasn't reading. He stood in the doorway, watching me for a while before speaking. You've been somewhere else lately, he said softly. Even when you're here. I looked up, startled, almost guilty, as if he'd caught me mid-thought. Work's been heavy, I said quickly. I'm just tired. He nodded, but his eyes didn't let go. Daniel doesn't raise his voice. He never has. That's what makes him hard to argue with. He just looks at you, calm, patient. Until the silence starts to feel like a mirror you can't look away from. After a long pause, he said. You don't talk to me anymore. Not really. You used to tell me everything. I wanted to laugh. Because the irony was cruel. I had told someone everything. Just not him. He took a step closer, his voice low. If something's wrong, I'd rather hear it from you than from the way you act. My throat closed up. There it was, the opening, the perfect moment to tell the truth. To let it all spill out before the guilt buried me completely. But instead, I smiled. A practiced, empty smile that didn't reach anywhere near my heart. Nothing's wrong, I whispered. I promise. He studied me for a moment longer. Then nodded slowly, as if deciding not to press further. Okay, he said. I believe you. But he didn't. I could feel it. And somehow, knowing that he knew, even without details, was worse than if he'd shouted, accused, demanded. That night, he slept facing the wall. I stared at his back, at the space between us that used to be filled with warmth. I wanted to reach out, to fix something, anything. But my hands felt like they belonged to someone else. For the first time, I realized what it truly meant to lose someone who's still right beside you. You don't notice the moment it happens. You just wake up one day. And they're gone in every way that matters. Except the physical one. I turned away, closed my eyes. And tried to convince myself that silence was mercy. It wasn't. It was slow, quiet cruelty. And I was the one who started it. It's strange how the truth doesn't come with fireworks. No shouting, no breaking glass, no sudden collapse. It just sits quietly inside you until one day you can finally face it. That morning, I woke up before Daniel. The sky outside was still gray, the kind of color that makes you unsure if it's dawn or just another cloudy day. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the steam curling above the mug. It reminded me of that first time, when everything began, and I didn't yet understand what I was risking. I didn't cry. The tears had already done their work weeks ago. What was left now was stillness, not peace, but acceptance. I realized then that the betrayal wasn't just the kiss. Or the lies, or the silence between me and my husband. It was deeper than that. I had betrayed the version of myself who believed love could last untouched. The woman who thought friendship could stay pure. The girl who used to trust herself. Daniel stirred in the other room. I listened to his footsteps, the sound of his mug clinking against the counter. He said, "Morning," and I said it back. As if the night before hadn't been another wall quietly built between us. He sat across from me. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Something inside me knew that he already sensed everything. Not the details, not the names, but the truth. And maybe that was enough. When he left for work, I stayed sitting there. Watching the light slowly fill the room. It felt both cruel and kind. The way the world goes on. Even when something inside you has stopped. So yes, I cheated. Not just on him. But on the life I promised to protect. On the silence I mistook for safety. On the friendship I turned into something it was never meant to be. And maybe that's the worst part of all. Not losing someone you love. But realizing you lost yourself long before they ever noticed.